There are many radio stations whose formats can make you feel old. Take classic rock, for example. Have you flipped on your local classic rock station, been surprised to hear something from Third Eye Blind or Three Doors Down? And you think, wait, isn't that a new song? And then you realize that in fact it was released 25 years ago and therefore fits the classic rock format? You know it's nearing time to retire when you hear the music of your youth on the oldies station in the gold format, which focuses on music released 50 years ago. Elton John, David Bowie, the Eagles. There's a reason for all of this. My name is Eric Bowman. I'm the Communications Specialist at the Canadian Psychological Association, and this is Mindful. A study from the University of Waterloo has taken another step in our understanding of the connection between music and memory. Whether you call it nostalgia or reminiscing, there are benefits to accessing memories of events we might otherwise have forgotten, and it looks like music holds some of the keys to doing so. Lead authors of the study, Pelin, Tanberg, and Yeung, have since moved on, Pelin to Toronto Metropolitan University and Ryan to the Rotman Research Institute of Baycrest Hospital. So joining us today is their University of Waterloo lab supervisor to talk music and memory.
My name's Myra Fernandes. I am from the Cognitive Neuroscience area in the Department of Psychology at the University of Waterloo.
And you've just put out a study that I think confirms something a lot of us thought for a long time. Now, I will tell you, I was in radio for many, many years, and there was always this mantra in radio that people really identify with the music that they heard when they were between the ages of like 13 and 16, somewhere in there. And that, that brings back memories and nostalgia. And you've narrowed it down even more to sort of say what type of music, why, and more importantly, yes, why that might actually be the case.
Yeah, you've got it. That intuition is definitely correct. I think that's sort of one of the things that inspired us is that people really took that even a step further and were starting to make their own playlists.
Right.
To help them reminisce.
Yeah. And is that something that, students in your lab were doing? What was the genesis of this in the first place that you thought, oh, maybe there's something there?
Right. Well, we actually read a newspaper article about a student who was delivering Meals on Wheels to some senior citizens and found that they were asking a lot about the kinds of music that they liked and really found that the people who they were talking with got really jazzed up and engaged whenever they started even just talking about music, particularly, as you said, music from your youth. And it was an article about one of the deliverers said, well, let me put together a playlist for you. And, off they went and quizzed them on some songs that they really liked and created a playlist. And then the next time they showed up to deliver their Meals on Wheels, they found that that client was saying that really was just a game changer for them. They were able to reminisce, and not just reminisce, relive, think back, call on details, see the details from events that took place at the time that corresponded to the era of that particular music. And so that's really what got us thinking about how in the world is music doing that? Is it reliable? And what component of these popular songs is really responsible for the effect? So that's really was our inspiration for doing this study.
And I know you looked at lyrics separately from the music itself. What component did you find was the most effective at evoking these memories?
Yeah, so the pop song had to be really unmodified in that it had an instrumental and the lyrics part. So the comparison really was what would happen or what would the ability of the music have to evoke all these past memories if you took the instrumental part away, if you took the rhythm and beat away and it was just prose. So that would mean sort of like reading a poem that contained the lyrics from the song. So there definitely are aspects of the song, but it doesn't have the beat, it doesn't have the energy, it doesn't have the instrumentation, it doesn't have the melodic tone of the singer. It's simply the lyrics themselves read out, which makes for a nice poem in a lot of cases, but not as effective in bringing about those past memories.
So if someone were to read me a poem and say, I don't know, despite all my rage, I'm still just a rat in a cage, age, and I would go, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about," but it wouldn't evoke the same memory as actually hearing the Smashing
Exactly.
Pumpkins song, right?
Exactly. So that first study that we did really just shows that you need the intact, unmodified song, which it consists of the lyrical components with the melody plus the instrumentation. And that really was sort of our first goal, was to even find out if it worked. And indeed, we did find, and this was that it did work. And we looked at it in young adults. We didn't look at it in senior citizens to start off with. We started with the young adult group, and we were ending up choosing songs that were from their youth, which, if you do the math on that, that's songs from, 5 years ago, because we were looking at young adults. So we had songs like, Ed Sheeran, Shape of You. We had Billie Eilish, Bad Guy. We had Old Town Road, Lil Nas and Billy Ray Cyrus. So we had, songs that were very recent because of the population that we were looking at. Were young adults. And really, it was quite striking the degree to which what we had people do was listen to short 15-second clips of
Right.
a bunch of songs, and then they had to push a button as soon as they felt themselves remembering an event. And so they made a button press indicating they were having a memory in a little over 50% of the trials, which means that majority of the time people were able to have a memory. And it was probably about a quarter of the time when it was just the poems or, the lyrics alone. So it didn't really have the same effect. And it was really quite striking.
Now, I'm wondering though, with these being young people, and I think you chose songs between 2017 and 2020, right?
Yeah.
Those memories must be more fresh for them than, say, somebody who's going to have memories triggered by the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy or how much is that doggy in the window, right?
Right, right. I mean, yeah, no, that's exactly it. So our starting point was, of course, the young adults, and that was the study that just came out in Memory and Cognition. Since then, we have extended this to a group of older adults who were between the ages of 65 and 80. And we actually chose to cue them with songs from 1960, I think it was 66 to 69. And we had songs like To Sir with Love, we had Honky Tonk Woman, we had some really nice ones in there. And what we wanted to find out was, is there the same effect even when those memories were, 50 years old, 50 plus years old? And this was really quite amazing. It did work. We had memories that people really weren't even thinking about just pop into their mind. It's that instantaneous nature of this cueing effect of music that really was quite remarkable in the seniors as well. When we had some conversations with them afterwards, and they said, it was unbelievable. I hadn't thought about being in the locker room, of my high
Right.
school in ages. I don't even think I would have thought to reminisce about that, but the song just brought me back right away. And that was one of the when I keep saying this was unbelievable, it was that the participants in the study themselves said, I just felt like I was there again. And we had a measure of reliving. So on a scale of 1 to 7, how much did you feel you were right back in there when you were experiencing this memory? Or are you just, writing about the memory or telling us about this memory without really feeling like you're there? And overwhelmingly, we found that the memories that were evoked by songs had a higher sense of reliving than the memories that were evoked by just the lyrics. So it's not like you don't get a memory ever if you, hear the lyrics to a song, but you don't re-experience that sense of being there. It was almost visceral in some cases. People said that, they felt their arms, had more energy if it was a memory of a tennis game, or, they felt that they were, right there feeling those emotions because they saw the school gym and it brought them back to a school dance, or
Right.
and sort of their heart started going and they were imagining seeing some certain first love or something like that. But anyways, it was really evident in interviews with people after they did the study that they felt like they were there again.
I worked for a time with the Dementia Society here in Ottawa, and we ran a music program where it was sing-along songs for people experiencing dementia who did find, some sort of communal ability to get together and sing the songs that they remembered from their youth. And I found it really interesting. And then And to think about it, as time goes on, right? And it was songs like, how much is that doggy in the window?
Hmm.
Or, even things like Oh Canada that people have grown
Hmm.
up with and that they just instinctively know. And then I thought, when I'm that age, if I'm in this group, the only songs I'm going to be able to sing along to and remember are by the Wu-Tang Clan. It's going to be very strange. And then I thought, my daughter the other day, we were in the car and, I used to drive her to school, drive her home, and I
Hmm.
would have my own CDs that I had in the
Of
car.
course.
And it was a Wu-Tang song that came on and she said, "Oh, this song was playing after I left my concert. I did the grade 7 concert choir con,
Oh,
and this was in the car on the way home." And I thought, okay, that's a neat memory to have
it
triggered
is.
by, well, the Wu-Tang of all things, but also that her music experience is fractured in a way that older people's isn't, right? Older
Mm,
people sort of had access to one pool of music, which was what was on the radio for the most part,
sure,
and people who were
sure.
really into it could buy the Zeppelin albums and that kind of thing.
Right.
But for the most part, they had a similar musical experience at a similar age. Whereas I think younger
Hmm.
people now, and I'm wondering if you found this was the
Hmm.
case with the people
Hmm.
in your study, the younger
Hmm.
people have
Hmm.
access to so much different
Hmm.
stuff and have
Hmm.
so much
Hmm.
varied taste in
Hmm.
comparison.
Well, I think that's a really great question about how does sort of your preference or genre of music that you typically listen to influence music's ability to have this wonderful cueing effect. And so we actually gathered ratings on how familiar people were with the songs that they heard, because it's possible that you might have heard a couple of the songs only once or twice, depending on the genre that you usually listen to, versus some that you might have been, hearing a lot. And by the way, all the songs that we chose were from the Billboard Top 10, so Billboard Top 100, and we chose the top 10 songs from each of those years. So they were highly frequent, but
Right.
nevertheless, that doesn't mean that the people listening to it would have heard the song, right? Because maybe they like jazz or they like heavy metal, or I don't
Oh,
know. We had too many rap songs in there, but maybe R and
there
B
was a
is their
lot of
thing.
Drake in the top 10
We
those
did have
years,
a
I
few.
think, right? Yeah.
And so basically, everything that I told you occurred regardless of the person's familiarity with the song. So their self rated familiarity with the song, like how frequently they would have heard it, did not influence the music's effectiveness at bringing about a memory. So it didn't matter if it was something that you liked. It might have been just something that was playing at the mall, on the speakers.
That's
It doesn't
true.
have to be that you paid attention to it. But these were songs that were probably, part of their era at different times. And that was what really mattered, was the full components of the song. And that really got us to think more about the mechanism of how is this working. So what we did is we actually looked at the time frame of the memories that people were producing. So we ask people, tell me what year approximately this is from, or give me a rough estimate of how long ago this memory was. And they were estimates, but what was really really interesting is the memory's year, like age, the age of the memory corresponded to the age of the song. So more recent songs brought about more recent memories, and the older songs brought about older memories. And they tended to correspond to the year when the song was most popular. So there was sort of like well, we call it a temporal gradient or a temporal alignment in what was evoked in terms of your memory and the era of the song. And we found that that was interesting for the following reason: in order for music to be effective, what we think is happening is it's allowing you to direct your attention into your memory banks to precisely that point in time. It's anchoring your search through memory so that you don't have to search through all your memories. It's actually zooming in on, if you think of your memories of your life as books on a bookshelf,
Right.
it's not only bringing you to the bookshelf, it's bringing you to the right book. And it's
Yeah.
saying, look here for memories. And it's doing it spontaneously. So it's that temporal anchoring that music is able to have that is the reason why people are also recalling memories quicker. So we actually measured how quickly they pushed the button to say that they were experiencing a memory. And if it was a full unmodified song with instruments and lyrics, the reaction time was, oh gosh, the response time was really short. We're talking about 12 seconds. It's
Okay.
actually really quick
Is that fast? Yeah.
versus it might have been, 20, 30, 40 seconds. And we actually had to cut them off so that they didn't, take forever to complete the study. But they were a lot slower. If they did have a memory to when they heard the poems and like slash lyrics, they were a lot slower to have a memory if they were going to have one. So there's not just the content access, it's the speed of access, which tells us about the mechanism that might be happening here. And that is particularly relevant to older adults or to people who are living with memory impairment, people living with dementia. Just going back to that example of the person who was making playlists for seniors, I think that for people who have memory impairments, I think this offers a way or to get back, a way to comfort oneself because reminiscing is fun. A lot of the time, we we take pleasure in reliving the past.
Right.
And we also see what was interesting. We saw this emotional alignment as well. So if the song had high energy as rated by Spotify, so we actually looked up Spotify ratings, energy corresponds to how much
Beats per
arousal
minute.
you experience, and we also looked at measures of positivity of the
Okay.
song in the content, tended to evoke memories that were more positive in self-rated nature. So that means that the participant themselves rated the memory as being a more positive one. And similarly, if it was one that was a sort of melancholy song, I don't know, heartbreak, there's a lot of those songs, it tended to evoke memories of that type as well. So we see this, if it's a negative, you get a negative memory, positive memory, but that doesn't always correspond to the lyrics. And what I mean by that is it could be a really upbeat song, that has high energy, makes you tap your toes, even though what they're singing about is a heartbreak. It's still maybe an upbeat song. That energy, that arousal, it's actually called song energy on Spotify, corresponds to the kind of memory that you're then going to evoke. So not only is there temporal alignment, there's emotional alignment with the song. And that's something that we've started exploring a lot more in some unpublished work. We started looking at this in seniors. As I mentioned, we had the songs like "Hey Jude" or "Honky Tonk Woman" and things like that.
Right.
And it definitely, not only did we have the temporal alignment, we had this emotional alignment as well. And there we actually expanded our cues. It wasn't just on unmodified songs versus the poems. We had a couple of other comparison conditions. We had just the instrumental version without the lyrics.
Hmm.
That was not as effective, nor was just the lyrics, and nor was another condition where we just had the song and artist name listed. So you might see, "Hey Jude," the Beatles, on the screen, and you're shown that for 15 seconds. There's no audio, there's no sound. It's just, the words. Do the words bring you back to the memory? No. That's what we found in the young adults as well as the senior citizens. It has to be the instrumental plus the lyrics together. So there's something about the melody, intonation, combined with the lyrics, the whole package. And it elicits the whole package in terms of the memory that you re-experience, that you relive. So they kind of go together.
That's interesting. I'm wondering, like, over the course of the last 70 years, since Billboard was a thing and there were pop hits and that, there have been these waves where, for a period of 5, 6 years, like late 50s into the early 60s or the early 90s with grunge, where it's sort of been a wave of incredibly depressing music. Right, the late 50s with "Tell Laura I Love Her" and all the songs about people dying, and like it was
Yeah,
all of the hit songs had to have something
yeah.
tragic take place in them. And then I mean my childhood in the 90s with Nirvana and Alice in
Mhm.
Chains, right? And I wonder if those fluctuations in just what is
Mm,
popular at that
mm,
time changes the way people have more negative memories of
mhm.
those eras,
I think that's a really great question. And so, what that means is we need to do some more research to actually look at people from in their 60s, people in their 50s, people in their 40s, age 40, people age 30 and 20, and get the whole spectrum because we can actually go back and look at that because their youth, which is, the songs that we typically choose, their teenage years, would have corresponded to those different eras when music would have gone through different phases, right? Like as you were
Right.
saying, some very positive songs, positive lyrics versus, a lot of rage in
Yeah.
certain eras and a lot of maybe we have a bunch of angry memories coming up for some age categories there. It's possible. We haven't looked at it, but I think that when people find themselves reliving a memory, even if at the time it was a sad memory, so it might have been, oh, I remember that was where I broke up with my first boyfriend. It was the school gym, blah, blah, blah. That song was playing. Now, later on, looking back on that memory, that memory doesn't feel as negative as it did at the time. It felt like it was the end of the world,
Right.
but very extreme negative. But there's something about just reliving the memory is kind of fun in itself, in a strange way. It's not that you are feeling as negative typically. It's usually sort of more muted. And sometimes there's even sort of a pleasure in looking back at, oh, that was such a time. And then it might bring back other related memories that aren't as negative, right? So
Right.
that's something that we really need to check a little bit closer in that we can look at the different types of music and the types of messages that were in the songs at the time. So there's some research on that actually to look at whether people who grew up in the 60s when there were a lot of protest songs and protest movements, like what sorts of memories are those songs evoking. There's a little bit that we would hope to start diving into by comparing those different age groups, but we're not quite there yet. We're actually moving a little bit more into looking at seniors, looking at people with memory impairments, and looking at its effectiveness in people, for example, who are living with dementia or maybe even just mild cognitive impairment, to see if there's a way to improve just the quality of life, right? Like it's a fun activity to suddenly have memories pop back into your mind. It's really comforting for family members too to know, hey, they're still in there, especially in those moderate to late stages of Alzheimer's can be horrible. And, playing that song, you get the person back for, 30 seconds, they're maybe recounting something that you thought was completely lost or inaccessible. And suddenly it's accessible again. And so that's really the conversation is how can we, or are there even memories that are still accessible in those later stages of dementia?
I've told this story, I think, on the podcast before, so our listeners can bear with me as I tell it again. But when I worked at the Dementia Society, and we were doing these music things. I was sitting next to one of the first days that I worked there. I was sitting next to this guy named Rob, who was a younger person, younger onset dementia, but there with his caregiver. And between songs, he would turn to me and say things. And the first time, I think he said, "At least I'm not walking on mousetraps." And I thought, yeah, like, what a weird thing to say, but okay, like whatever's happening in there, like great, sure. And I agreed. Yes, it's better that you're not. And then
Okay.
later, at least I'm not in a hospital gown. And I finally
Wow.
realized, as he was saying these are things I had done when I was on the radio. And he recognized me from when I was a
Oh, wow.
radio personality and was talking about those things. And the music was triggering this for him.
Oh,
And so
amazing.
after this event, I sat with him and I talked to him for 20 minutes and I told him the whole hospital gown story. And then the
Wow.
next time I saw him, I told him the same story again because that's the one he wanted to hear, right? And he didn't remember that he'd
Right.
met me a few days earlier, but the fact that he was in there and just whatever association he made with that, and
Right.
his wife was quite shocked that he was able to recognize basically a stranger, right?
Amazing. And then I'm just even amazed at that story. I think we kind of intuitively had a sense, or a lot of people have these experiences and think, oh, well, yeah, obviously music's really helpful. It pops me back into that time era. And I mean, that's great anecdotally, but is that really true? And that's really where you need some research to back it up. And for sure it's in line with our intuitions. And then I think we have the opportunity to go even a step further and then say, okay, well, how is it doing this? Is there something about like the type of cue? Does it have to be auditory? Can visual cues help? Can we specify what it is about those cues so that when we go about our daily lives today, even though we're not in our teenage years or our youth,
Right.
can we then use music while we're doing activities so that later on, when we hear a song again, it's a window into, what we were doing 3 years ago? Can we use it in that way? And so this is really where we would like to go, is to find out more about not just is it effective at helping you to reminisce about your youth, but is it useful as a tool? Can we use cues in a way going forward to actually help us to take in more of a context or an event? And I think that, I think you had an example earlier about, I think it was your daughter getting into a car and then, they talking about an event that had happened. And I think that the business about remembering where you were visuospatially, remembering that it was a car, maybe you were even brought back to the map of the city that you grew up in that you hadn't thought about since, moving away to college or university. And so music not only brings about the memory of, yeah, the event, but it brings back all that visual stuff that goes along with it that makes a memory cool and helps you relive it. And it's the you get it for free, like the color of the car, the color of the seats, what the radio looked like, that there was a CD player.
Right. Yes. That's how old. That's
You're
how
brought
old I am now. Yeah.
you're brought
Car
back.
CD
But I
players.
mean, all that extra stuff, and that's what's really neat about memory, is it's not just the feelings that come back. It's not just the retelling, the storytelling of an event, but it's the re-experiencing of the visual. It's the ability to say, oh, I haven't thought about that car in a long time. I remember it always had that stain in the bottom left corner of the seat. And these are little details that you can pick up on that you didn't even maybe know that you encoded, right? It sort of comes, that's what I mean when I say it comes for free.
Yeah.
You get all this visual recreation. And that's what's really remarkable about the fact that any cue can do that. But music seems to be able to do that better than most. And pop songs is what we've looked at, probably because they're things that are pervasive. It's a good thing that it's an audio because it still allows you to take in the visual. So maybe your memory formation is facilitated because you're not distracted by other, information. But having an auditory cue is really kind of, it becomes part and parcel of the memory of the car and the stain and the CD player.
Yeah.
It's just like that, it all kind of packages together. And so when you recall an event that happened that's related to the song, you get all that extra stuff right along with it, which makes it kind of neat. And that's really what gets me excited, is how's our brain doing that at the time of creating the event? And how is it that just playing one aspect of that event is enough to bring back the whole thing just like that, kind of quickly and
Right.
unexpectedly when you weren't even thinking about it? That's what's unbelievable.
And that's something that I'm thinking about now, right? You use the analogy of the bookshelf, right? That it's able to not just, point you to the right section, right? Where you're not just in the self-help section or the cookbooks or the young adult or whatever, but the specific
Right,
book you can pull out
right,
when you hear the
right.
song. And I'm wondering, and like you said, pop music is pervasive, right? You could be the
Mhm.
biggest metalhead in the world, but you still couldn't escape
You can't get
Despacito
away
in
from it.
2017, right? Like it was everywhere. So when you hear
Yeah,
Despacito and you pull out that one specific
right.
book, I've got to think that there must be 30 other memories associated with that song because you would have heard it so many times.
That's true.
Why that one particular one? Why is, you know what I mean? Like,
Yep, yep. No, yeah, I'm looking at, my song list. I've got Louis Capaldi, Someone You Love, and these are songs that were not from my youth, I can tell you that. I have Juice World, Lucid Dreams. So there's some really good ones in there. But I think, so your question is why? Is
I,
that's like in a
I'm
nutshell
getting,
what you
yeah,
want
and I
to
don't imagine there's a specific answer for it either. But I'm curious as to, I'm assuming your brain has a jumble of memories, all of which are
know?
triggered by a
Right, right. I
particular
see.
song, but you're
Right,
pulling out
right,
the
right.
one, maybe the
Why that
best of
one?
those memories or the most
I
vivid.
see. Yeah, I don't know if it's always the most vivid one. And so here's the thing, the limitation of our study, and maybe even something that we could look at in the future, is what if we gave them a chance to report 5 or 6 different memories associated with the song? We didn't do that. We asked them to just come up with one. Why they chose that particular one, I have no idea. So that's a really good question. Why that one? I actually I don't think that it would have been there's any rhyme or reason to it. I think that there's probably a bank of memories from that era, from that book, from that time shelf.
Right.
Yeah, from that bookshelf. I think probably we would have to ask people, do you have other memories? And if so, can you just write them out or tell us about them? And, we didn't even give people a very long time. We asked them, give us 2 or 3 sentences to describe the memory. So we weren't even giving them a lot of scope to write. And still, they gave us some very rich narratives in those 2, 3 sentences that they were able to produce. So we could easily extend that to say, okay, once you're done with one, give us a few more. And then we could, have a look at maybe asking them for a little bit more detail as to, well, why this one? I don't know that we would have insight into it. I think that's sort of the funny thing about memories is we're not always consciously aware of why a particular memory got associated with that song. It could have been that at the time, you were highly emotional, and we know that emotion at the time of encoding helps you take the memory in and consolidate it better. Maybe that's the case. Maybe not, though. And that's not something that I can answer with this particular research question that we had, this particular publication, but fantastic question for the future. I mean, why that one particular memory
Right.
is being called up. Yeah, that's a good one.
And I'm also thinking, and I don't think there's an answer for this either, but I'm thinking about the way that, so many studies have shown how unreliable our own memories are, right?
Mm,
When we all remember where we were at the same time in the same event, not all of us remember it the same way. Sometimes
yeah,
we conflate two things with another. And
sure.
I have to presume that that's the case here as well. Does it matter,
Hmm.
though? I'm guessing is what I'm
Hmm.
asking. But does it matter how
Hmm.
accurate that memory is, or is
Hmm.
the feeling that it produces what matters in this case?
Hmm. Well, I think if you're trying to look at this for accuracy, we as experimenters or other people would actually have no idea if it's accurate or not unless we brought a family member in and asked
Right.
them to verify the content of the memory. So that's one way that we could do it. In terms of their order of events or the perception of how an event unfolded, like let's say it was a really negative memory of, convenience store robbery, and they happen to have, seen it from the car, or maybe they were even in the store. The way in which the events unfold were their perspective, their motivation, their angle at the time, their way that they might have rehearsed it after experiencing that event. And what might be their truth of what happened in that event may not be the actual truth that you see in the videotape of the convenience store robbery, right? So our memories are a product of our rehearsal at the time that we have experienced the event. And then let's say we recount it to tell other people what happened. The story changes a little bit each time you tell it. The story gets recreated, details get added in through suggestions, through maybe, news reports that you read that then somehow get incorporated into your retelling of the event, which should have been a firsthand account of the event. It's very rarely, in fact, probably never exactly precise. It is a
Right.
product of that person's motivations, it's a product of their retelling, it's a product of what maybe a police officer came and asked them, well, did the person have a green hat? Well, I mean, they might not have been thinking of a green hat. Maybe the person didn't even have a hat, but suddenly their memory incorporates that the next time they tell the story because it was suggested at the time by the police officer, and then it becomes integrated into their memory and it becomes the truth for them, right? So I think for us to verify the accuracy of a personal memory, other than sort of verifying the gist of the memory, through a family member, I don't think that we can get at that, because even just for regular memories that aren't cued by music, memory is a tricky thing.
Right.
Memories can become biased by other people's suggestions and inserting information, or maybe even, you don't mean to mess up your memory, but say your memory of where you were on 9/11, memory when you found out about COVID and schools getting shut down, those sorts of memories become tainted and change because we've had a lot of information since then retelling us what happened on that day that
Right.
somehow get incorporated into how you might have been thinking, even though, you weren't at the time, but memories get molded, right? Every
Yes.
time you bring them up again. And that's the problem a bit with memory. But it's a good thing because without it, how in the world would you learn to update your chemistry knowledge from high school to college to university, right? You update it each time. So it's a
That's
good thing
true.
that our memories work like that. But it's
Yes.
a bad thing when you're trying to recount events.
No, a new edition of the textbook every time. It's funny. You mentioned like, being in a convenience store robbery or something that's sort of
Yeah.
traumatic and that you remember that. And I remember being in a grocery store where a big fist fight broke out. And all I could
Mm.
think of was, this is the wrong soundtrack. They were playing
What?
"Summer Breeze" by Seals and Crofts on the on the speaker, and I thought,
Wow.
this is just all wrong. And I wanted to get a
Wow.
manager not to break up the fight, but to change the song so that it
Right.
fit the occasion. That's just
Wow.
how my
Wow.
memory works.
That's unexpected. I mean, what if we had that song playing and you were in one of our studies? I wonder if that would be the memory that you would come up with,
You know
or if
what? I
it might be
don't think
another
it would
memory
be. I
associated with
think
that
you
song.
mentioning the convenience store
Yeah.
robbery is what made me
Yeah.
remember that. I think
Yeah.
if you played Seals and Crofts' "Summer Breeze," I would remember that that was the song that came on when I turned on my motorcycle to start I was the lead rider in the this Ride for Dad in Ottawa. It's a prostate cancer
Oh,
fundraiser,
nice.
and everyone
Nice.
looked at me like, "Really? That's what we're going with?" Like, right? We could have "Born to Be Wild," we could have something else, but that's the song that's.
That's funny. Yeah, so I mean, I really think you ask a good question about, why we zero in on that particular memory. I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is, but we do know that the song was somehow associated to it. And the fact that the song, I think this is really where the mechanism of action is something that we really want to specify with our science is how is music doing that? How is it zooming in to that year? Like, I mean, it's actually quite surprising that the memories, some of the memories, probably I would say about half of the memories, showed that temporal alignment in that older songs evoked older memories. But a lot of the memories, I'm talking about half of them, were actually memories from a time prior to the song even being released.
Okay, right.
So there are those cases, but they still show this, temporal gradient, and so why they chose that memory that's slightly older, we didn't probe that. It might be because maybe that memory of that event of going for ice cream repeated a lot during the time when that song was popular, and so someone just went back to the first time they went for ice cream with their new dog or new puppy or something like that. And so even though the song wasn't popular when they first got their puppy, the fact that it was an event that they did a lot during the time when the song was popular might have led them to recall that older memory. So there's a lot of different ways we jump to different memories and how they might be interconnected. That's a great question. We need a massive neural network to look at that. But I think that nevertheless, we did see though this gradient in that there were definitely more recent songs or more recent memories and older memories for older songs. For the most part, they aligned with when the song was released, but in some cases, they actually extended beyond, but they still tracked in terms of old, middle, and recent with the era of the song. So there's something about ordering our memories. There's something about how our memories are organized in our brains, which fascinates me. How do we store information? Is it by topic or is it by timestamp?
Right.
And this work suggests it's by timestamp.
So I guess when the classic rock station plays something by Blink 182, it can do more than just make us feel old. For a moment, it can make us feel young again. Thanks to Dr. Myra Fernandes for joining the podcast to talk about her research, and to you at home for listening, streaming, downloading, and reviewing today's episode. Mindful is written, hosted, and published by me, Eric Bowman. Our producer and editor is Jamie Montgomery, and our theme music is Avenues by David Taylor. Longtime podcast listeners, take a listen. See if this brings up any memories.